Right then guys, this is PSL here and I am here for the first of my season summaries in my Jordan career mode on Grand Prix Manager 2. I've already done 3 seasons during which I've already won 2 Drivers' Championships. One with Barrichello in the second season, 1997, and the other last season with Gerhard Berger. Jordan have also won 1 Constructors' Championship during my tenure to date. That was during 1997. We were oh so close to a second one on the trot last season, but Benetton bested us by just 2 points. I'm still blaming Panis for that, although to be fair there were so many occasions where we dropped points due to a mistake by me, so I can't entirely blame Panis. I did say that Panis was the best driver we had last season, and I think the argument I made for that is still largely valid. But the fact of the matter is that Jean Alesi scored 6 more points than Panis last season, and Alesi did 1 less race than his compatriot. In fact, Alesi was only beaten by Uko Katayama, the most successful Ferrari driver that season, in 6th, Michael Schumacher in 5th, Jacques Villeneuve in 4th, Rubens Barrichello in 3rd, and then the 2 championship protagonists, Mika Hakkinen, who just lost out on the championship to the only Jordan driver who did almost every race last season, Gerhard Berger, by only 2 points. Anyway, heading into this season there were a number of changes. Firstly, the Canadian Grand Prix at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve has been axed in favour of the Hungarian Grand Prix at the Hungaroring. Also, the traction control driver aid has been legalised, and finally, the engine capacity has been increased. Not only have the rules and regulations changed, but so have the configuration of the teams, although I'd be lying if I said the changes were significant. Starting off with my team, Jordan, and the only changes here are that we've swapped our ex-driver number 2 / test driver Olivier Panis and replaced him with Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who is now our permanent test driver. Frentzen is in purely because he is German, and we needed a German to get Mercedes engines. But then I mistakenly signed a contract with Nissan, which I was pretty pleased about. Jordan Nissan? Oh shit. Anyway, I did sign a contract with Mercedes straight after for the following season, just because Mercedes was still willing to supply us at that time, as we still met all the performance and nationality criteria at the time, because it is entirely likely that come the end of this season, we just won't meet the prerequisites for Mercedes to want to be with us. The long and short of it is that we've got Nissan engines this season and then Mercedes engines for next season. But this accidental switch opened up the possibility for me to conclusively discover just how important engines are in this game. As I've said earlier on in this series, I've never been able to progress that far with the likes of Forti and Minardi, because I can never finish in the top 4 of the Constructors' Championship. So here it is sort of the opposite situation. We've got a proven decent team with the best personnel, drivers and some recent championship trophies. The only change is that we've gone from one of the basically necessary to win the championship top 3 engines to one of the lesser ones. So how much worse will Jordan be this season just from a swap in engines? So now that you understand the setup and what I'm looking to discover during this season, it's on to the rest of the teams, and Williams are fielding exactly the same team as they did last season. Ferrari have, rather interestingly, and only 1 season earlier than they did in real life, swapped Eddie Irvine for Rubens Barrichello, and even with Katayama at the team, Rubens is still the driver number 2. Poor guy. McLaren are running the same team for the 3rd season in a row. Benetton have filled the gap that Barrichello created by bringing in Emmanuel Collard as the driver number 1. Collard may be French, and I have seen him win races during previous experiences on this game, but even still his driver rating isn't exactly deserving to be in a championship winning team such as Benetton, and the fact he is the driver number 1 and Mika Hakkinen is only the driver number 2 is very strange. Since ourselves at Jordan now have Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Sauber have had to get a new test driver, and that driver is Pedro Lamy. Much like at Sauber, Minardi have also changed their test driver and nothing else. In fact, Minardi have had to replace the outgoing Pedro Lamy, so they got Sospiri. 40 are running exactly the same team as they did last season. Simtek have changed their chief mechanic from Dave Lockett to Sam Fratello, who was 40's original chief mechanic, which in theory is a slight upgrade in personnel. Simtek, much like a lot of the other teams, changed their test driver as they got rid of Gounon and brought in Sarazan. Finally it's Pacific, and they have exactly the same team as they did last season. Just before I headed into the first race of the season, I did some pre-season testing at Silverstone, albeit with an Estoril setup. Anyway, of all my drivers, Jean Lacey was the quickest and was a good quarter of a second quicker than the reigning Drivers' World Champion Gerhard Berger. Heinz Frentzen was proving why he is only our test driver, and in fact, even Sauber's test driver for a good while, as his best lap time was almost 4 entire seconds off the best time set by a Lacey. So with all of the pre-season shtick out of the way, it's on to the first round of the 1999 season, and it's at Jerez. Now I should point out that of all the circuits, Jerez is the only one I don't have a setup for. So I used the Estoril setup, which is not perfectly suited to this circuit. So we were going to be slower during this Grand Prix than in all of the subsequent ones. Well, in theory anyway. And at the end of qualifying, Benetton once again asserted their position at the front of the field, with Collard less than 2 tenths behind Hakkinen. Villeneuve was the leading McLaren driver on the second row, and Katayama took 5th. Johnny Herbert staggeringly beat Michael Schumacher by the tightest of margins, both of whom beat Rubens Barrichello in the other Ferrari. Then you can find both Saubers led by Hill, both Jordans led by Alesi, both Minardis led by Fisichella, both 40s led by Lagorce, and finally the sole Pacific and Simtek drivers who made it within the 107% time. Specifically, they were Goossens and Chattarella. On the run down to turn 1, Emmanuel Collard in the first Benetton dropped 2 places from his starting position. Then on lap 33 we saw something quite worrying. Norberto Fontana in the Minardi overtook the almighty Gerhard Berger in one of our Jordans. I know we haven't got a Jerez specific setup, and we've downgraded significantly from a Renault engine to a Nissan one, which, let's be honest, has become the main focal point of this season, from our perspective at least. But I never expected a Minardi to make a genuine and hard fought on-track overtake against one of our guys. As I was getting over that shock, Katayama then retired at the back end of the race, so it's nice to see some familiarity this season. Katayama retired due to a driver mistake which led to him spinning off, so he still hasn't improved even though this is his 3rd season with the biggest name in the business. The race results were very similar to the qualifying ones. Collard moved his way back up to 2nd and just behind his teammate Mika Hakkinen, who won the Grand Prix around Jerez. Michael Schumacher made up a couple of places to finish just behind both McLarens, and Barrichello took the final point just ahead of Johnny Herbert. As far as Jordan are concerned, the only positives to take from this expectedly poor race was that Alesi outraced both of the Saubers, and Berger did eventually beat Norberto Fontana in the Minardi. Just before the first true race of the season, at least as far as Jordan is concerned, I broke into Benetton's factory and stole the plans for their stepped bottom for only $156. But when I went to fit it to our cars, I found it was an illegal part. So if Benetton are actually running it on their cars, then that explains why they were so quick last race, because they're breaking the rules. Also, in light of Alesi being the quickest driver in the team, I have extended his contract by 2 seasons, so he will be with the team probably until the end of this series. At the end of qualifying for the Brazilian Grand Prix, McLaren emerged as the quickest team, with Villeneuve on pole position and Coulthard in 2nd. They were a couple of tenths quicker than the Ferraris led by Katayama, who in turn were 2 tenths quicker than the Jordans led by Gerhard Berger. Yes, even with the Nissan engine, we were still the 3rd quickest team in Interlagos, and we beat the next team, which was Benetton, by over 2 whole seconds. That's right, 2.2 seconds separated 6th from 7th, and maybe that has something to do with our discovery of Benetton's illegal part, and so they can't use it anymore. Finally, 6 drivers failed to make it within the 107% time, but one of those wasn't Mark Goossens, as he unbelievably qualified in 9th, beating, amongst other great names, the mighty Michael Schumacher in the Williams. For the second race in a row, we saw 2 overtakes made on the run down to the first corner, as both of the Jordan drivers passed Katayama. Nothing else happened the entire Grand Prix until around lap 60, as Damon Hill, Emmanuel Collard and Uko Katayama all retired in quick succession. Katayama's was significant as he ended up relinquishing 6th place. Hakkinen finished just behind both Jordan drivers who scored the team's first points this season. The podium was made up of both McLaren drivers as they took a 1-2 following from Benetton's 1-2 at the previous Grand Prix, and Barrichello took the final podium position. Also, as a quick side note, Katayama retired again due to him spinning off. Round 3, Buenos Aires, and Benetton were back on top in qualifying and a good 3/4 of a second ahead of the McLarens. Following them was Ferrari, Williams, Sauber, Jean Alesi, and then Alberto Fontana, who once again bested Gerhard Berger. And then comes everyone else who all made it within the 107% time. At the very start of the race, Michael Schumacher stalled his car and thus retired immediately from 8th place. It wasn't much better for our guys though, as off the start, Alesi was overtaken by Fontana and Gerhard Berger was overtaken by Frank Lagorce in the 40. Needless to say, Gerhard Berger ended up losing a lot of time being stuck up behind Lagorce. It didn't make any difference because we were clearly never going to score points this Grand Prix, but something more substantial was Emmanuel Collard spinning off and retiring from 3rd place, and he could have, depending on how strategies panned out, finished in 2nd place. That just makes it all the more disappointing that this new driver, who Benetton took a gamble on by making him their driver number 1, ended up costing them many valuable points through his own mistake. Come the end of the Argentine Grand Prix, Hakkinen won, Villeneuve finished in 2nd, and Coulthard came in 3rd. Katayama not only finished this race, but finished well as he beat his teammate to take 4th. Even Sauber scored a point as Damon Hill impressively, although some key retirements definitely helped him out, finished in 6th. Finally, Jordan had a miserable day, and being stuck up behind a Minardi/40 early on just accentuated the problem, as Alesi finished 4 laps behind Hakkinen and Gerhard Berger was 5 laps down on the race winner. Just before I entered the 4th round of the season, I broke into Williams' factory and it turned out they had an even better stepped bottom than Benetton's. But once again, it's an illegal part, so I didn't get it because it won't be useful anytime soon, and instead I got their rear wing. Qualifying for the 4th round of the season at the Nürburgring ended with McLaren on top and ahead of Ferrari by a second. Impressively, Jordan ended as plainly the 3rd quickest team and ahead of Hakkinen and Damon Hill, who beat the other Benetton driver of Emmanuel Collard. At the very start of the race, both of our drivers overtook Rubens Barrichello in the Ferrari. Immediately afterwards, the top 6 pulled a large gap over the rest of the field, which is a good sign for us this race. During the first pit phase, Jean Alesi was temporarily in 1st place and ended up 3rd at the end of it. And this is yet another example of Alesi dragging out every last ounce of performance from our car. Now, this year's Jordan may be aerodynamically superior to many of the other cars on the field, and it may have perfect handling, but it is underpowered, and that's a shame because I reckon 1999 we could be way up there with Benetton and McLaren if we had a comparable engine. Come the end of the 2nd pit phase, Gerhard Berger passed Uko Katayama just before the Ferrari driver retired. Not long after that, the checkered flag came out and Jean Alesi finished 3rd at the Nürburgring and behind only the McLarens. Even Gerhard Berger finished 4th, so we were genuinely the second quickest team that race, which is brilliant for ourselves as well as Nissan in their debut Formula 1 season. Finally, I should point out that Katayama retired because he spun off. That's the 3rd time he's done that in only 4 races so far this season. That's a finishing ratio of only 25%, which is beyond unacceptable, especially as he's Ferrari's driver number 1. As we're a quarter of the way into the season, we should look at the championship standings, and at the moment Jacques Villeneuve is leading the Drivers' Championship with 30 points. That's 9 more than Häkkinen in 2nd and 11 more than Coulthard in 3rd. Barrichello is 4th, showing Ferrari do have the speed. The problem is that Katayama just can't finish a race to save his life. Then it's Jean Alesi who is ahead of a Benetton driver no less, even if it is only Emmanuel Collard. In the Constructors' Championship there isn't much to say as it's still early days, but currently McLaren have twice as many points as Benetton in 2nd, and Jordan and Ferrari are tied for 3rd on 12 points. Again, Ferrari have the better car, but we have the better drivers, and it means that we are higher than we deserve to be. Qualifying for the 5th round saw Benetton take the top 2 spots, with Häkkinen almost half a second ahead of his teammate. Then it was both McLarens, as always, led by Villeneuve. And interestingly, the 3rd quickest team that sees its drivers qualify in 5th and 6th is Sauber. Our drivers were all the way down in 13th and 14th positions, which meant that both Minardi drivers actually beat us in qualifying. The weird thing is that at some races, like the previous one, we're rivaling Ferrari, and then there's ones such as this one where Minardi are giving us a run for our money. I didn't expect to be that quick with this Nissan engine, but I really didn't foresee us fluctuating so wildly up and down the field every race. Early on into the Grand Prix we gained 3 places as Johnny Herbert, Uko Katayama and Norberto Fontana were all given 10-second stop-go penalties, all in the same lap. Just after Gerhard Berger came into the pits for the final time, Jean Alesi retired from 9th place because I mistakenly underfueled him. It didn't change the course of the race though, as Mika Häkkinen still won the San Marino Grand Prix but didn't lead a 1-2 finish, as Jacques Villeneuve beat Emmanuel Collard to 2nd place. David Coulthard finished in 4th, with Damon Hill finishing where he qualified, which was 5th. But Martin Brundle wasn't able to make it a double point scoring race for Sauber, as he was beaten by his former Jordan teammate Rubens Barrichello. Embarrassingly for us, Gerhard Berger was still beaten by Herbert and Katayama despite their stop-go penalty. In between the 5th and 6th races, I tried to steal the plans for Sauber's suspension, but their security was too tight. So in the end I bought their level 10 skirt, a driver aid which I hadn't developed yet since there's been no reason to. But since it might be legalised at some point, I got it, especially as it was a steal at only $6,000. From Imola to Monte Carlo, and a completely different track saw a completely different result for us. At a circuit where the difference in engine power is far less noticeable, it's no surprise that we ended up with 5th and 6th positions on the starting grid. Unsurprisingly, Alesi beat Berger and Villeneuve beat Coulthard to take pole position. But what was a surprise was that Katayama outqualified his teammate to take 3rd place on the starting grid for the Monaco Grand Prix. Behind the Jordans were the Williams, led by Johnny Herbert, and then in 9th place was Mark Goossens in the Pacific, and joining him on the 5th row is Minardi's Norberto Fontana. That means that both Goossens and Fontana outqualified the 2 Benetton drivers, who started the race all the way down on the 6th row of the grid. Finally, Sauber had a really poor session, way below their usual standards. Uko Katayama had a phenomenal start to the race as he overtook both McLaren drivers to take an early race lead. Alesi fared just as well, making up 2 places himself to be going around in 3rd during the early stages of the race. Around the lap 20 mark it started raining, and through all the chaos our drivers did drop a couple of places. One of those was to Johnny Herbert, who unfortunately for him retired from 4th place just as the track started drying up. With him out of the way, we pitted for the slick tyres, but once again we lost places through the pit stops. One of them this time was to, of all drivers, Norberto Fontana in the Minardi. And that's how the race ended. That's right, Norberto Fontana, this under-the-radar 24-year-old Argentinian, finished a changeable conditions Monaco Grand Prix in 5th in a Minardi. That has got to be one of the most amazing race results ever seen on my channel, and it completely overshadows the fact that David Coulthard mastered the changeover points in the conditions as he won the Grand Prix, beating his teammate as well as Uko Katayama, who finished in 3rd. This Grand Prix is one where the underdogs triumphed, and one where Uko Katayama actually finished. It's strange that Katayama finished the most difficult Grand Prix in 3rd, yet has failed to finish in 50% of the races up to this point. That's right, Katayama's finishing ratio, even after this Grand Prix, is only 50%. That's abysmal, but it is double what it was after the 4th round of this season, so, well, I guess that says it all really about Uko Katayama. Anyway, by this point it is pretty well established that the Jordan team, despite using Nissan engines, is a solid top 5 team this season. Better than that, it is entirely possible we could finish in the top 3 in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously we've got a lot of decent parts, a top tier chassis, the best brains in the business, as well as 2 of the best drivers who are both currently in good form. But I think what has helped us a lot is the fact that, just by coincidence, we already had a level 10 traction control system. Maybe I developed it, or maybe I purchased it from another team, honestly I can't remember. Also, I know that McLaren have a level 10 traction control system, which again I think goes a long way to explaining why they have been the team to beat so far this season. The exact opposite could explain why Benetton are so far down the order at some races. Maybe that's the reason, maybe it isn't, but something is going on there, because on the surface, nothing at that team has changed, and you don't go from a Constructors' Championship winning team in one season to inconsistently way off the pace in the next without something changing. Anyway, that is all for this episode. The 1999 season will be concluded in the next episode, which I promise will be out in the not too distant future. 6 rounds down, 10 to go. Currently the championship fight is between McLaren and Benetton. But will Ferrari, Sauber, or even ourselves rise up the order to challenge or even beat the established top 2? With a new driver aid being introduced this season, a lot could change as we progress through, because some teams will catch up, whilst others, such as us at Jordan, will be sitting here waiting for everyone else to get their own level 10 traction control system. I mean, even Minardi, well, Fontana at least, because Fisichella hasn't been up to much, have been getting some impressive results of late, and so has Mark Goossens in the Pacific. Will any of them make a late season charge up the championship standings? Well, to find out you'll have to watch the next episode, in which we will see who is crowned the 1999 Drivers and Constructors Champions.